I've lived in rural Vermont my whole life. Grew up in a tiny town where everybody knew your name and your secrets. The kind of place with one gas station, no stoplights, and where the silence at night is so thick it feels like it has weight. I used to think it was peaceful, serene even, but now, I'd call it something else. Back in 2017, I took over my grandfather's farm after he passed. It was about a mile outside town, old Victorian house, big red barn, and this windmill that had been there since the 1930s. The thing was tall, rusted, and had long since stopped turning. It stood like a sentinel in the field, always visible through the window in my kitchen. I used to stare at it during breakfast. It gave me a weird feeling, but I never thought much of it, until everything changed one night in late October. That week, temperatures dropped fast. We'd had our first snow, and I was in the habit of checking the animals in the barn before bed. That night, I walked out around 9 p.m. The moon was out, full and bright, casting sharp shadows across the field. I remember clearly because that's when I saw something off. The windmill was turning, slowly, deliberately, turning like it was powered by a breeze. But I felt nothing. No wind on my face, not even a whisper. The trees weren't moving. Everything was dead still, except that ancient windmill creaking and spinning, like some invisible hand was pushing it. I stood frozen, staring at it. A rusted windmill that hadn't turned in decades doesn't just decide to start working again. I wanted to chalk it up to wind, maybe a strange draft, but I was unnerved. Still, I forced myself to finish my check on the animals and headed back in, locking every door behind me. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise. A dull, metallic clang. Not constant, just one sharp bang that echoed like something heavy had struck metal. I sat up in bed, listening. Nothing. Then another clang. It was coming from the field, from the direction of the windmill. Now, I should explain something. I'm not the type to jump at shadows. I've hunted in the woods, walked home in pitch black, and lived through brutal snowstorms alone. But something about that sound cut deep. I didn't want to look, didn't want to confirm what I already feared, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled aside the curtain. The moon was still high, and there it was again, that windmill. Spinning fast now. The blades were slicing the air in complete silence. And at the base, I swear to God, there was a figure. Tall, slender, barely distinguishable, just a silhouette standing at the base of the windmill looking straight up at it. I ducked back, heart pounding. I was trying to think, was it a trespasser? Someone from town messing around? But who the hell stands motionless under a windmill in the middle of the night? I grabbed my rifle, but I didn't go outside. I watched from the shadows, trying to convince myself I imagined it. After a few minutes, I peeked again. The figure was gone, and the windmill had stopped turning. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found footprints in the frost-covered grass, leading from the tree line to the windmill and back. They weren't from boots, not even bare feet. They were wrong, long with narrow toes and deeper in the heel, like whatever left them was heavier than it should have been. I took photos, sent them to a friend of mine, Mike, who works for wildlife control. He couldn't identify them, said they looked like they could have been manipulated or faked. I didn't press the issue. I could tell he didn't believe me, but I knew what I saw. That day, I avoided the field entirely. But that night, things escalated. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I heard it. Not the clang this time. A voice. It started faint. I thought maybe it was the TV left on in the other room. But when I walked through the house, everything was off. Still, the voice persisted low, mumbling like a man whispering under his breath. I pressed my ear to the window. Nothing. Just my own breath fogging up the glass. But then I noticed something moving. The barn door was open. I always lock it. Always. I grabbed my flashlight and gun, heart hammering. Stepping outside, I could feel the cold air pressing down on me, heavy and sharp. My boots crunched through the thin snow layer as I made my way to the barn. The flashlight flickered. Cheap thing, I should have replaced it. But even through the weak beam, I could see the door wasn't just open. It looked like it had been pulled off the hinge. One side was hanging loose. I stepped inside slowly. The smell hit me first, rot, urine, and something metallic. The animals were agitated. The cows were kicking at their stalls, bleating and groaning. The chickens had scattered. Some feathers were stuck to the walls. Then I heard it again. The voice. Closer now, whispering unintelligible but right behind the stall. I raised the flashlight and my gun and stepped forward. There was nothing there, but the whispering continued. Now it was coming from above me. I tilted the flashlight up toward the loft. Just hey up there, or so I thought. And then it moved. Something long and pale slipped out of view faster than I could register. It was like an arm, only longer than any human's and too thin, like it was stretched skin over bone. I backed out of that barn faster than I've ever moved in my life. Locked it shut. Double-checked every window and door. I didn't sleep. Just sat with my back to the wall, staring out the kitchen window at the windmill. It wasn't turning, but something was crouched on it. First, I thought it was a bird, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was humanoid. Perched near the top, clinging to the metal blades like some deformed spider. It was watching the house. I don't know how I could feel its gaze, but I could. The next morning, I called Mike again and told him everything. He came out, checked the barn, saw the damage, saw the prints. Still didn't believe me, but he looked concerned. Suggested maybe someone was stalking me. Some drifter or junkie. But that didn't explain the thing in the windmill. I started researching local legends. Found something strange. Old Native American records from the area referencing a spirit called the Lurker, a guardian of dead land. It would haunt places where the ground had been defiled. Places where things had been buried that should have stayed that way. My stomach sank. Years ago, my grandfather had hired someone to dig a trench near the windmill to reroute water. That area had a bad reputation even back then. Tools would go missing, animals refused to graze there. Locals used to call that patch Whispering Ground. Grandpa never paid it any mind. Now, I think we disturbed something. The final straw came a few nights later. I woke up to every single window in my house wide open. No broken glass, just open. Snow blowing in, curtains fluttering. And all over the floor were feathers. Chicken feathers. Dozens of them. I sprinted to the barn. Every animal was gone. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just gone. And then I heard it. The windmill. Turning. Creaking. And underneath the sound, that whisper again. Only this time it was clearer. It said my name. Twice. That was it. I packed up the next morning and left. Sold the farm a month later, never went back. It sat empty for a long time before someone else bought it. A young couple. They lasted 6 weeks before they left in the middle of the night. I never found out what they saw. But sometimes, when the wind picks up and I hear that old creaking sound, I think of the windmill. And I remember what was perched on it, watching. I've always loved exploring off-the-map places. Old ghost towns, forgotten roads, abandoned houses, you name it. Something about history that's left behind draws me in. But after what happened last fall, I've stopped chasing the past. Because sometimes it doesn't want to be found. This happened in northern Montana, near the Canadian border. My buddy Chris and I had taken a week off work for a hiking and camping trip. He was one of those guys who hated the city and always talked about unplugging. I was down for it, and we chose a remote forest area that used to be part of old mining territory. Barely any cell service. Just pine, mountains, and silence. We were a few days into our trip when we took a side trail not marked on the map. It looked well-trodden, like someone had used it regularly. Chris thought it might lead to an old mining site or hunting cabin. We were both curious, so we followed it. The path twisted through dense trees and eventually opened up into a small clearing. And there it was, this weather-beaten log cabin sitting all by itself like it had grown out of the earth. It didn't look totally abandoned. The roof was sagging but intact and the door was slightly ajar. There was even smoke residue on the chimney as if someone had used it recently. I'll admit I felt uneasy the moment I saw it. It wasn't fear, exactly, it was more like the air around it was wrong. Heavier, thicker. It felt like the forest had gone still, like the trees were holding their breath. Still, Chris was already walking up, calling out a hello like we were dropping in on an old friend. No one answered. He pushed the door open. It creaked loud, like it hadn't been moved in years. Inside, the place was dusty but surprisingly clean. No graffiti, no broken furniture. A small table, a chair, and a bed with a moldy mattress were the only things in there. A journal sat on the table, thick with pages. Chris opened it. I'll never forget what it said on the first line, scrawled in shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, do not sleep here. It watches from the trees. We both looked at each other. Half nervous laughter, half serious. Chris flipped through more pages, entries talking about a man who lived there in the 1950s. He'd gone off the grid. No family. He mentioned hearing footsteps outside at night, knocks on the walls, shadows that moved when they shouldn't. The last entry was dated July 16, 1953. It simply said, I made the mistake of sleeping. I woke up, but the cabin didn't. Chris thought it was a prank. I wasn't so sure. Something about the way the handwriting changed near the end, more frantic, letters barely legible, felt real. Raw. We left soon after. The sun was already dipping behind the trees and we were about a 90-minute hike from our camp. I remember walking back and constantly checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing on the trail behind us. But it was just forest and quiet. That night at camp, we couldn't stop talking about the cabin. Chris wanted to go back the next day, maybe take the journal and look for clues. I didn't want to. I told him the place felt off, like it wasn't supposed to be found. He laughed, but I saw something in his eyes, like maybe, just maybe, he agreed with me. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. The fire had gone out. The woods were dead quiet. Not even wind. But what really woke me was the sound of wood creaking, like footsteps on floorboards. Only, we were intense. On dirt. I held my breath and listened. Creak. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I thought I was dreaming until I heard Chris unzip his tent and whisper my name. He'd heard it too. We sat up in silence for a long time, scanning the darkness with our flashlights. Nothing. No animal sounds. No branches snapping. Just cold air and that sense that something was nearby. At some point, we both fell back asleep from exhaustion. But the next morning, neither of us spoke much. We ate breakfast quickly, eyes constantly darting toward the tree line. The silence of the woods had changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loaded, like something was listening. Despite my protests, Chris insisted on going back to the cabin. Said we might have imagined it or missed something important. I was hesitant, but I also didn't want him going alone. So we packed up and returned down the same path. Only it wasn't there. I swear to God, we followed the same trail. I recognized the curves, the tree with the knot that looked like an eye, the fallen log we stepped over. But the clearing? Gone. Just more trees and underbrush. No cabin. No signs of disturbed ground. No journal. Like it had never existed. Chris was convinced we missed it somehow. I wasn't. I knew where we had been. We finally gave up and started heading back. That's when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A flicker, like someone ducking behind a tree. I froze. Chris asked what was wrong. I didn't say anything. I just stared into the woods. I know I saw movement. Then we both heard it. Knocking. 3 sharp knocks, far off, but definitely real. Like someone knocking on wood in the middle of the forest. We didn't speak. We just started walking. Fast. We reached our car in silence. Neither of us said a word on the drive back to town. It wasn't until we got home a few days later that I decided to look something up. I searched old property records from that area. Found a vague mention of a cabin built by a man named Richard Elmer in 1951. No record of a death, but in 1953 the structure was listed as condemned after it was found completely empty. Locals apparently tried to burn it down, but when they returned with supplies the next day, the cabin had vanished. That part shook me, because I didn't tell anyone that the cabin we found had disappeared, just like the record described. Still, I tried to put it out of my mind. But then 2 weeks later, I received a package. No return address. Just a small box with a worn leather journal inside. It was the same one we saw in the cabin. Same handwriting. Same pages. But this time, there was a new entry. I saw them again. 2 of them. They found the trail. I warned them not to stay. I think it followed them home. That night, I had the worst dream of my life. I was back in the woods, walking toward the cabin, only the trees kept shifting behind me. Closing in. I could hear footsteps behind every tree. Then I saw it. The cabin. Except it was twisted. Wrong. Like it was made of bones and rot, shifting in place like it was breathing. And through the window, something looked out at me. Not a man. Not an animal. Just eyes. Endless, white eyes. I woke up screaming. Chris called me an hour later. Said he had the exact same dream. Things got worse after that. At night, I'd hear knocking on my bedroom wall. Always 3 knocks. Always around 3 a.m. I tried moving apartments. The knocks followed. Chris said he'd seen the cabin again in his dreams. He described it changing, growing. Windows multiplying. The wood turning black and oily. And always, the eyes watching. He even tried burning the journal. Said the fire wouldn't catch. Pages wouldn't tear either. Like it was protected. We started researching more folklore, missing hikers, unsolved disappearances near that forest. Found dozens of vague stories. One stood out. A report from 1962 about 2 hunters who vanished in the same area. Their tents were found, still set up. Food half-eaten. No signs of struggle. But nearby, someone found a small wooden door frame, freestanding, nailed to nothing. Like a doorway waiting for the rest of the cabin to return. We don't talk about it much anymore. It's been over a year, and the dreams have slowed, but haven't stopped. Sometimes I'll get a text from Chris in the middle of the night, just a photo of his hallway, or the woods behind his new house, and always the same message. I hear knocking. I grew up in a small town in rural Virginia, the kind where everybody knows everybody and life moves about 5 times slower than anywhere else. It's peaceful, quiet, and to most people, boring. But to me, it was home. After my mom passed, I moved away for college and eventually settled in DC. Life got busy. Calls with my dad became shorter and less frequent. So when he had a minor stroke last year, I decided to take some time off work and return home to help him recover. The house hadn't changed much. Same creaky floors, same ticking grandfather clock in the hallway, and the same giant orchard out back, acres of apple trees that stretched beyond the property line. My dad used to tend them every fall. He hadn't been able to for years, and by the time I got back, the trees had grown wild and tangled, vines curling up their trunks like veins under pale skin. I'd always loved that orchard as a kid. I used to play hide and seek there with my cousins. But something felt different this time. Off. I noticed it the first morning when I walked out with my coffee. Everything was still. No birds, no wind. Just rows and rows of trees standing perfectly straight as if they were waiting. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The house was too quiet. Around 2:30 in the morning, I thought I heard something tapping on the window. Just once. Then silence. I figured it was a branch or an animal. The next day, I started clearing the orchard a little, mostly trimming back the overgrown branches. That's when I noticed something weird. In one of the deeper rows, near the back of the property, there was a single tree that looked wrong. It was black. Not burned, just dark, almost ashy, and completely bare. No leaves, no fruit. Its bark had deep ridges that looked like something had clawed it. At first, I thought it was just diseased. I snapped a few photos and planned to ask a local arborist later. But when I stepped closer, I saw something carved into its trunk. A word, stay. I didn't say anything to my dad. He was already dealing with enough. I just trimmed some of the lower branches and moved on. That night, I heard the tapping again. Not just once this time, 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Like a pattern. I sat up in bed and listened. The sound was coming from the window facing the orchard. I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. But as I looked, I saw movement. A flicker. Like someone ducking behind one of the trees near the back row. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I found something even stranger. There were footprints in the dew-covered grass outside the house. Bare feet. Human. They led from the orchard to the side of the house and stopped just beneath my window. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, that someone from town was messing around. But something told me not to go to the sheriff. Not yet. Later that day, I talked to Mr. Winslow, our neighbor who'd lived down the road for over 40 years. He was in his late 70s now, moved slower than he used to, but still sharp as a tack. When I mentioned the tree, the black one, he went pale. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You didn't touch it, did you?" I told him I trimmed the branches near it but hadn't touched the trunk. He said nothing for a long time. Then he told me a story I'd never heard before. Apparently, in the late 1800s, our town had a string of child disappearances, 6 in total, all under the age of 10. No bodies were ever found, but they all lived near the edge of the orchard. One day, a search party went out and found a freshly dug pit near a tree. Inside were old dolls, scraps of fabric, and a child's shoe, but no remains. After that, the townsfolk tried to cut down the tree they found it near. The same black tree. But no matter what they used, axes, saws, even fire, the tree wouldn't fall. Eventually, they gave up. The disappearances stopped, and over time, people forgot. But some, like Winslow, remembered. He warned me not to go near that tree again. Not even in daylight. "It don't like being disturbed," he said. I wanted to believe it was just an old man's ghost story. But that night, I woke up to something I'll never forget. A whisper, right next to my ear. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was soft, feminine, childlike, and it said my name, Danny. I jumped out of bed and turned on every light in the house. I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the couch until sunrise, clutching a baseball that I hadn't touched since high school. The next day, I went out to the orchard with a bottle of gasoline and a lighter. I was done with this. I didn't care what the story was. I wanted that tree gone. I reached the back row and stood in front of the blackened bark. It looked darker than before. The word "stay" had grown longer, as if the tree had stretched it down the trunk. I poured the gasoline over the roots and up the side. The liquid dripped into the grooves like blood. I struck the lighter. Nothing. The flame flickered and died instantly. I tried again. Same thing. I couldn't explain it, but the lighter wouldn't stay lit near the tree. It was like the air itself was sucking the flame away. Then I heard it. Behind me. A whisper carried on the wind. Stay. I turned, but no one was there. That night was the worst. I dreamt I was walking through the orchard in the dark. The trees were whispering. The leaves rustled without wind. Every few steps, I'd hear children laughing, but not joyfully. It was hollow, mocking. Then I saw something ahead of me. A group of kids. 6 of them standing in a semicircle around the black tree. Their skin was pale, their clothes old-fashioned. And none of them had eyes. Just black sockets. They all turned to look at me in unison. And they smiled. I woke up drenched in sweat. My window was open even though I never opened it. The air smelled like apples, rotten ones. That was the final straw. I called my sister and told her I couldn't stay. I said Dad needed to come live with her in Raleigh and I'd handle the arrangements. I didn't say why. I packed my things, booked a hotel, and left that same day. But before I did, I took one last look at the orchard. From the edge of the property, I could see deep into the rows. The black tree stood taller than before. It looked less like a tree now and more like a figure. Long-limbed, hollow in the middle, watching. And underneath it, barely visible, 6 small figures stood in the shadows, swaying gently like leaves in the breeze. I turned and walked away. I never went back to that house. We sold the property to a developer. I don't know what they did with the orchard. Part of me doesn't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I'll be driving through the countryside and see a single tree off in the distance, dark, twisted, standing completely alone. And I swear I can hear it whisper, "Stay."